We just got a brand new Colin and C2 as part of the release of Chapter 5, and in this video you're going to learn if it's worth summoning either one of them. Before we start, keep in mind these are both unlimited characters and thus will be added to the main banner once this banner ends. Also, it's interesting to note that on one of my Japanese accounts, this was the first banner I summoned from, so I have a strong attachment to it. Now that's out of the way, let's get to the characters. Okay, let's start with C2. So I'm looking at her right here, I'll click on her character. C2 is a rank 3 Annihilator pilot, 13 cost, pretty solid defense, really good health. Redeployment time is normal, which makes sense, Annihilators don't have fast relocation time. Generally speaking, Halloween Lelouch does though. Her attack power is 716, not so great long range, so use her in a nightmare frame with a melee weapon. Now let's go on to her special abilities. Her first skill is that she increases this unit's attack power by 35% for 17.5 seconds after a set amount of damage is dealt, received, or healed. And her second ability is that she increases this unit's block count by 1 during the combat. If you go up, you can see it's currently 1, so it would be 2.
Obvious.
Here are my thoughts on the new C2. One of the things that sets her apart is the fact that she has both high defense, high health, and high melee attack power, meaning she can serve as both an attacker and a defender, especially when she boosts her own block by 1. In comparison to the rank 3 Colin, this C2 does have less attack power, but has higher health, lower cost, and better defense, so overall she's a better Nightmare Frame pilot. Obviously, Cornelia is still the best melee attacker in the game, but this C2 serves as an excellent budget substitute for her. In fact, going further, this C2 will continue to be one of the best budget substitutes for a melee attacker, especially for the Black Knights, which will come into play for future faction wars or just when more pilots come out, like Taizo, who will make the C2 even better, like every other pilot in the Black Knights. And since we're talking about the future of this character, once she gets the anniversary boost, she will combo well with the Gawain's melee weapon as her health will reach 6,000. Actually, it's going to be over 6,000, which means you can use the Gawain's melee weapon multiple times, and the Gawain also boosts C2's skill, so there's great synergy there. And what's interesting is that even though they've power crept this character several times in the Japanese version, she's still very useful on most teams, especially on a Black Knight team. So I really like this character, and I use her quite often on my teams even now, especially in the harder missions. Now, while I really like this pilot, there are some things about her that I don't necessarily like. I am of course referring to her as a pilot, not the character C2. That would be a video for another channel, which won't even happen. So the issue is that C2 does have high attack power, but I wish it was a little higher. I understand because of the way this character is designed, they had to balance it out, so giving her lower attack than say something like Cornelia or Colin makes sense, but in the future, you might find this attack power not sufficient enough to take out enemies, unless of course you're using a really powerful Nightmare Frame, which we will get in the future. As it stands now, she's in the middle between Urbe Colin and definitely weaker than Cornelia, but I guess her other abilities make up for it. Now, another thing to consider, while this C2 does have really high defensive stats and high health, she can't actually substitute for a defensive pilot like Senba, Toto, or even the defensive Kallen. It's just not good enough, which means that you could put C2 in the front lines to block a few enemies, but just keep in mind she could get mowed down as well, so you can't rely on her in the same way you would with those other characters. If you play the game correctly though, this situation shouldn't occur often, but just keep in mind that while C2 does have really high defense and health, she is not better than any of those defensive pilots currently in the game. Rather, those stats just give her more durability on the battlefield. So overall, a great pilot, good attack power, really powerful abilities, can serve both as a defensive and attacker, and can serve as a great budget substitute for other attackers in the game, and the use of this character will only increase as more Nightmare Frames come out, and of course after the first year anniversary boost. Now we're done with C2, let's go to Colin. So here's her page, let's click on her icon to learn more. Colin is a rank 4 defensive pilot. Her cost is kind of middle of the road, it's the same as Toto's, but it's higher than Suzaku's, so it's not the best, but it's not the worst. Her defensive rate is actually higher than Toto's. She has the second highest health in the game, only less than C2 in the Zero costume. Block is pretty standard. Her attack power is kinda low, but at least it's higher than Toto's, I guess. Now let's go on to her abilities. 1 second after placement and every 30 seconds thereafter increases this unit's block count by 1 for 27.5 seconds and reduces attack damage received by 0.737 times. And by the way, this ability and her second one will get a boost from Colin's Nightmare Frame. This is especially important when we get the Gurn Mark II, but I'll get back to that in a moment. Okay, for her second ability, 1 second after placement and every 20 seconds thereafter increases the defense of all deployed ally units by 35% for 17.5 seconds. So here are my thoughts on the new Colin. Now, one thing you might have noticed is that on the current tier list for the Japanese version, this Colin still ranks really high up there. I believe she's S rank. And you might be wondering why that is the case. Well, the thing is, this new Colin has really high defense and really high health, and that only got better after the first year anniversary boost. But even before that, this pilot is just really powerful in that regard. She is basically the ultimate wall, and not just for herself, but for the rest of your pilots, because she boosts their defense as well. And that's not a faction specific ability, that works on every pilot, which means she can go on every single team. And even now, there aren't many pilots in the game that have the equivalent health or defense as Colin, making her still good today as she was when she first came out. Another reason why this Colin is still good even today, and will be really good for us players in a global version, is that the Gurn Mark II gives her a significant boost, because that Nightmare Frame not only has really high defense, which combos well with her defense, but it also boosts all her skills to level 5, which is really important. So you can understand why she's really good. And keep in mind, for the Ashford faction challenges, this Colin is still widely used and will be for a very long time. And since we're on this topic, this Colin obviously combos well with the other Ashford pilots, especially the Millies, who can reduce her cost even further to allow you to deploy her for even less. So given this character's multiple uses, it's really easy to understand why she still remains one of the best characters in the game to date. Now, if there's one problem with this character, I'd have to say her attack power is kinda low, which means unlike the first Colin we got, you can't simply use this character to both defend and attack. So you'll have to back her up with other annihilators, either ranged or melee. She's just not good enough for that. There's nothing wrong with her in that regard, but she can't defeat enemies on her own. Again, she's a shield, not a sword. Now you might be thinking, okay, both of these characters are really good. Should I then do some pulls on this banner, or should I wait for the summer banner? Well, here's the thing. In the future, these two characters are always going to be relevant. For the summer banner, I would say maybe a year from now, maybe even 6 months, 2/3 of those characters will not be as relevant. While I like Cecile, as you guys know, her character won't be that great in the future because they are going to power crap her with better cost increasers, passive or on deployment. And with that upcoming Colin, she'll only really be useful if you don't have a better healer or for Ashford faction challenges. Now that C2 will be useful for a very long time until they power crap her with New Year C2 and Anya and Valletta and eventually the Summer C2, which came out this year for the Japanese side. So what I'm saying is that for future investment going forward, I think this banner is better. But if you just want those other characters because of the artwork, or maybe because in the short term they will be great, then definitely save it for the summer banner. It's entirely up to you. Another thing to consider, if you're not interested in this Colin, but only want C2, then you can skip the banner altogether, because once C2 joins the main banner, it'll be much easier to get her than a rank 4, because she is a rank 3. Something that you should be aware of is that later on in the game, they stopped producing as many rank 3s as they did in the beginning. In fact, the last one we got in the Japanese version was Urabe, and that was in the start of R2. Keep in mind, before that, we got Cecile, and that was towards the end of R1. We've had months in between, which means that rank 3s are being produced less and less. So the chance of getting C2 will still be pretty high even months after this banner. In fact, you'll probably get C2 so much that you'll get sick of it. Well, maybe not all of you, but you understand my point. So depending on if you are a free-to-play player or a whale, consider these things going forward if you choose to summon or not summon from this banner. But I will say that these characters will help in completing the harder missions. And speaking of that, even though the current expedition event has just ended, You can still play the normal expedition levels, including the hard ones. If you are struggling currently with that, I made a guide on how to defeat it, and you can watch that right here.